Thank you so much for being here this morning. My name is Peter Reynolds. I'm chair of Bitterroot Climate Action Group, and it's just great to be together this morning with you. This meeting has been 2 years in the making, literally. Dr. Robin Saha, who's here as one of our facilitators today from the University of Montana Environmental Studies program, put together this idea: what would it mean to create environmental education and community planning in 3 rural Montana communities, looking at climate change and what's happening to our communities. So we've been working all along, especially in the last year, and I want to acknowledge our coordinator, Cheyenne Burrows, who's been working hard all year and fell ill with COVID earlier this week. So unfortunately, she's not here, but we really appreciate the effort she made to get us to this place. I just want to mention, please put your cell phones on airplane mode or silence them, because we're going to be videoing quite a bit of today's presentation. So Robin and his staff and various ones of us have been working on this, and last week we had science exhibits from Spectrum in Hamilton Middle School. They're going to be at Corvallis High School next week. Very interesting, interactive activities around making your home more resilient, how to make it more efficient, different kinds of things like that. We have a couple of those displays here. And you see the folks we teamed up with here to put this meeting together. And we have 3 purposes here today. One is to learn about the changes happening to our valley due to climate change. Another is to look at our vulnerabilities as a community, our economics, our recreation, many different things, and to start figuring out what we can do as a community to create more resilience. And 3, start an ongoing conversation across businesses, agencies, citizens, about ongoing understanding of it, and including climate change and what we're doing. So to accomplish that, today we're first going to have a science presentation by Dr. Bruce Maxwell, who I'll introduce in a moment. We'll break into facilitated groups, 6 of them, and we have trained facilitators from the university and elsewhere in our community that will be running that process for us. We'll have a lunch break and a short report out from the groups, and then we'll have a panel discussion here from several people with different perspectives in our community to reflect on what we've been hearing this morning. So all that will happen between now and 2 o'clock. That's our plan. And if you listen to the experts, one of the biggest things we can do about climate change is start talking about it. Though something now over 70% of the people understand there's a problem, they might not have a complete understanding. Something like a year or 2 ago, it was 35% of the people had even one conversation about climate in the last year. So it can be kind of a scary subject, but it also calls us to really look at what we love, what we care about, what are we willing to do, what are we willing to sacrifice to start to make a change in our way of living. We'll be talking about mitigation today, things we can do to make things more resilient. For instance, Bitterroot Climate Action Group has distributed 50 portable filtration units for air purifying this year. We try to give away more every year. This is great, it's adapting to the problem, but the problem is getting worse, and we need to understand that and go forward with what we figure out together we need to do. That's what the Bitterroot Climate Action Group is. It's a nonpartisan network of folks who care and are trying to see what's going on and what can we do. And by the way, if you feel meetings like this are valuable, please check out our display over there, and there's a donation jar out and a rack card where you can make a donation online. So that's the plan today. I hope that's all clear. When we get to the end of this presentation, I'll give you instructions for getting into the groups, and then later about lunch. So now I want to introduce Dr. Bruce Maxwell, who's a professor at Montana State University, specializing in agroecology, invasive plant ecology, ecological modeling, and precision agriculture. He's currently a lead investigator of a project on agricultural management optimization under high uncertainty. Dr. Maxwell was the lead author for the agriculture section of the Montana Climate Assessment in 2017 and was appointed by Governor Bullock in 2019 to be on the Montana Climate Solutions Council. And he co-authored the Montana Climate Change and Human Health Report in 2021. He's received numerous awards for his teaching and his research. He's written more than 100 peer-reviewed papers, and he's a Hamilton native, and I feel very pleased that we were able to capture him before he retires in December. So please help me welcome Dr. Bruce Maxwell.
It's been 51 years since I left, actually, Missoula and Hamilton. So it's been a long time, but it's always fun to come back here and see all the amazing change that's occurred. But I'll try to offer you a few anecdotes that I find kind of interesting that keep reoccurring in my head, especially from my father, who watched the climate closely, as everybody in Montana kind of does. With that, I'll start my talk. I want to say at the onset that it's so good to see a group like this come together and promote the concepts of resilience and adaptation to climate change. And even, I try to always stress that even if there isn't climate change, this is all good. Everything that we're doing is good because it improves the efficiencies of our system, and it really makes us look at our natural resources and our ways of depending on the natural environment through agriculture, et cetera, to make a living. So this is going to be data-rich sort of presentation. My sense was that that's what you were looking for. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of changes in trends that have occurred. We did a pretty good job of capturing the trends in the Montana Climate Assessment 5 or 6 years ago. So, but with that, this is the climate assessment, and the information is still, I think, fairly good in that. It's deserving of an update, and if somebody would pay for that, that'd be great. At the National Science Foundation, we had to twist their arm to fund this years ago, and after that they said, well, you're on your own and your state should fund it, and of course that isn't happening. So I think I got to start with a few things that you might have seen before, but people have to understand the difference between weather and climate. And when we talk about the variability in climate and over a number of years, typically when we're talking about climate, we use a 30-year stretch. So when you see on TV at night or hear on the radio that it's some percentage of normal, the precipitation or the temperature or whatever. They're talking about a normal that's based on a 30-year period, and that's updated every 5 years. So that's the way the meteorological people do that. We're realizing that that's probably not a long enough stretch, and it may not be a short enough stretch to pick up the really rapid kinds of changes that are starting to occur. When we look for trends in the data, we realize that it goes up and down. We have warm years, we have cool years, we have wet years, we have dry years. So we track those kind of things in this way. And so you can see that what we're looking for is this trend line that's kind of in the middle. And the variability we capture with some sort of estimate of our confidence in that mean change over time, that average change over time. Does that make sense to people? Okay, good. Yeah, I think it's been emphasized plenty. Well, the climate resilience in the Bitterroot Valley, a science primer for Ravalli County. This report is fantastic. Those of you that have been involved with that report have done a really, really great job. I think it's a great example, a model for many communities in Montana. So congratulations on that. I think I wanted to add one quote from that report that I think is so important, and that's a resilient community is one that is able to predict, prepare, and respond to changes in a positive manner. Adaptation to climate change refers to actions that lessen the impact of climate change or protect people and nature from those impacts. So sometimes we're not sure, and there's indirect effects of climate change. And so that relationship of exactly what is going on with those changes is hard to predict. But again, even if we're wrong, it's not a bad idea to think about how do we stabilize our systems as much as possible. And I think there's some key ways to do that. And a lot of those are focused around drought, flooding, excessive heat, smoke, and fire. And I'm going to address some of these, but not all of them. This was a report, part of a report that I think was interesting, and it pointed out how different Ravalli County is perhaps from the state, because it kind of has the annual the precipitation in inches, and Ravalli County's in the blue, and this orange one is Montana as a whole. And you can see that Ravalli County gets more precipitation, and that's not, I guess, a surprise. And that gives some resilience immediately relative to some places in the state. So in working across the state, and mostly with agriculturists, I can tell you that they are far more challenged, perhaps, immediately than you guys are. Not to say that you aren't, but anyway. So a couple of things that I want to bring up here. One of the things that I do that's different from what most of the analysis that comes out of NOAA, because when you automatically get the data or scrape the data off the internet, you tend to get seasonal data. And what that means is they take three-month increments. Well, I think the summer in Montana is June, July, August, and September. And all of the other data analysis is June, July, and August. So, and that's one of the changes that's probably occurred. And what I will show is scatters like this from Hamilton, at first for Hamilton. And mostly I'm showing you these because I was checking a website that is a fantastic website called Climate Tools that takes the place of me. I mean, you don't need me. You can go to that website and get all the information you really need. But I was making sure that it was giving accurate information, and where it didn't include what I think winter is 4 months, and I think summer is 4 months, it doesn't quite do that easily. So anyway, there's some change, some differences there. But I was checking to see how accurate it was, and it turned out everything that I checked, which was a few things, I kind of cherry-picked a few possible relationships to look at, but they were accurate. So that's the good news. So you won't need me anymore, so I can retire. The other thing is that there's always this scatter going on over time, and so this is starting in 1980 and going up to 2022. And when I show a line, that's a significant relationship. So that's with a 90% confidence that we're capturing a trend in that system. And that is, we're seeing a significant increase in those summer temperatures in Hamilton. So, give you a local perspective. Is there any different month that's showing more of the maximum temperatures? No, doesn't matter. June, July, August, September, they're all represented, so there's no trend in that. Also, the days in the summer temperatures greater than 95 degrees Fahrenheit have not increased. Again, this is different than some of the reports that you've seen, and certainly for the state, it's definitely the case that we're seeing an increase, but not in Hamilton. Actually, Hamilton's an outlier. It and Big Timber, for some reason, stand out. And as the only two stations out of 15 that I looked at that actually didn't show a trend, a significant trend. So you will see others present that there is a significant trend, but they're only using those 3 summer months. So these are all the things that I want to make you aware of, because you know what to trust, what not to trust, but also just how you look at the data can really change it. So I think sometimes we are out to find certain kinds of outcomes, and so we push on with that. I mean, how are you going to come and give a climate change talk if you're going to say, oh, it doesn't matter, or things haven't changed? So, no trend. However, winter months, the minimum daily temperature has definitely increased. So we don't get as cold in the winter. I think everybody's seeing that, and it's pretty clear, and Hamilton's is no different. That's certainly a statewide consistent thing as well. And again, I'm including December, January, February, March, rather than just January, February, March that you see in a lot of the analysis. So that's a significant increase. The number of hard frost days is declining in Hamilton, in the Hamilton data. So that you've probably seen. That doesn't mean that the frost can't hit you when you least expect it. In other words, don't wait to plant your pumpkins or your tomatoes, because they could still get nailed by frost. So there's a high probability of still having these extreme events. So that's behind this. You gotta understand those things. Okay, so this is that climate toolbox. And it's amazing the amount of information that's packed into this thing and the ways that you can look at it. In fact, I really didn't get to the meat of my talk because I was so busy looking through this thing, because I just discovered it. Has anybody seen this? You probably all know about it, and I don't. Okay, yeah, it's got all kinds of information, and I know you can't read this all, but it's kind of divided into these different sections of data that, or analysis that would associate with agriculture, climate, fire, and water. Very, very, very useful, and it taps into most of the kinds of data that you might want. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that it might not include, and it just goes on. Okay, so when I looked into this tool, the nice part is you can actually select a point, and it'll use the closest station, or you can actually outline an area and it will average all the stations within that. And that's climate assessments are typically done on an area where you can get an average across different stations, and they're done for that 30-year period. What I was giving you before for Hamilton was just one place, and there was no averaging going on there. I was using actual daily data to give you that. And so that's something that's a little different with that previous analysis. So I covered the region from Florence to Sula, which is, I think, includes most of the valley. And it certainly includes all of the stations that I could actually find. I didn't get a picture of those stations, but they're pretty much associated with these communities. Ooh, that's hard to see. I don't know if you can see that, but can we shut off part of the lights? Or is that something we can't do because of filming? Or might be a good idea so you could see these lines a little better. So this is December through March. I actually could set the months on this part. And this is the average of the winter months, temperatures, the maximum temperatures, and it shows this fact that it's going up and down, but there was no real trend in that, again. And then when I did the minimum temperatures, of course, there was a trend, just like in Hamilton, but now we're combining all the stations across that area. So increasing temperatures seems to be consistent throughout the Bitterroot. And just a couple of side notes here. Warm winter, what does that mean for us? Well, warmer winters is probably one of the things driving pine beetle attacks. It's one thing that we get winter annual weeds that increase. And we're seeing a real flush, I would say, of those winter annual weeds, like cheatgrass and bentonata and some of those. Winter wheat favored over spring wheat. This is just a management change that can occur, but we're seeing a lot of increase in the acres that are going into winter wheat. So even in the Bitterroot, where you really haven't had that much problem with winter kill, it's still worthwhile to think about winter wheat because of the patterns of our weather are such that it lends itself to management, whether it's planting, whether it's harvesting, and most importantly, when the actual seed fill occurs or when pollination actually occurs. It gets too hot earlier now so that we don't get good pollination. So that's an issue, but winter wheat kind of escapes that by being earlier. So, summer. Summer temperatures, June to September, significant increase in the valley, and minimum temperatures. Oh, I just lost my sound. I think I lost my sound. It looks like it's on. Oh, maybe that's it. Okay, test. Well, I'll speak loud. Oh, okay, let's just do that. Minimum temperatures in the summer are nighttime temperatures, okay? And you might think, well, so what, big deal? How many people have air conditioning in their home? Okay, probably a third, maybe a quarter, a third. If people don't sleep well, there's a ton of disease situations that start to creep in, especially mental health kinds of factors. And we didn't know this until we did the Montana Climate Change and Human Health report, but we started investigating that. So that's a big deal, it turns out, because if you don't sleep at night because it's too warm, then that's a significant effect. And agricultural people seem to especially have issues with that. Warmer nighttime temperatures means that we also have certain insect insects that their populations will increase, and some of those are pest insects, and so that's another piece. There's a whole number of things that are associated with that warmer nights piece that's a significant trend. So far I've been showing these scatter points and the actual data points coming off of the data that's available to us. This is a different way of, this kind of goes in and out too. This is kind of a different way of looking at data, and here what we do, and you'll see this, you usually have a choice between the two approaches to look at data within the Climate Tools toolbox, and that is that this is showing the difference, what we call the anomaly, from the mean for a given time, and usually it's a 5-year period. So in this case, it's over the 1980 to 2020 period, whatever that you want to select. But what it starts to show here is that certainly the temperatures, or the minimum temperatures here in the summer, were getting warmer and warmer as time goes along. So that's just a different way of showing it. Now, I think it's a little more easy to tell what years were really warm and which ones weren't warm relative to the average over that period of time. Okay, this is, oh, that was the minimum temperature. Oh, hot nights, people lack sleep. Oh, this is another important thing. Livestock don't gain weight well, especially cows. They need cooler temperatures at night. And part of that might be that they're walking at night a lot more to find water. There's all kinds of issues associated with that we're not really sure about, but the fact is those temperatures go up at night, and most ranchers will tell you that their animals aren't gaining weight as well as they would if it was cooler. So another important point. This is the annual days, 90 degrees Fahrenheit or higher for Hamilton. This was 1980 to 22. Sometimes you see people putting trend lines there that may not be accurate, and that's because they're using Excel, and Excel gives you trend line regardless, but doesn't tell you whether it's significant or not. And unfortunately, that line shouldn't be there in my approach. Okay, let's turn to some of the temperature projections from the models. And when I say projections from the models, there's 20 models. So for every set of years here, this is going back to 1971 to 2000, using the models that we're going to use out into the future. I want to see how well they're doing. And because they were trained on that data, they do quite well in terms of these kinds of box plots are showing that you have all 20 outcomes from the 20 different models are in that box, and it's showing that within that larger box, or that outside box, that's 50% of the data, and the median is the blue line. So you can kind of see that, number one, we're pretty confident about the past. As we start to move into the future, we start to lose a lot of confidence. In other words, the models get spread out in terms of what their predicted outcomes are. Nonetheless, they all pretty much agree that we got a significant increase in that, in those responses, looking out to the end of the century. That is using what we call the RCP 8.5, which is one where we probably don't do much in the way of trying to mitigate our carbon input into the atmosphere. And it's not just carbon, I mean, it's methane gas as well, which is a carbon derivative. But nonetheless, those are factors that you should be realizing. Summertime, minimum temperatures, again, same sort of thing, a little more spread in this case, but the models are indicating that we're going to increase quite a bit. Projected change in days with heat index greater than or equal to 90 degrees. in this area, and again, this is all output from that toolbox. This is looking at an increase of 12.2 days of heat, and this is the year, this is 2010 to 2039, and versus the historical simulation of 1971 to 2000. So using the past, this is the number of increase in days that we should expect here in the Bitterroot for those 95 plus degree days. January to December precipitation, no trend really in that. We're seeing that that's fairly constant. And so when you use the projection models, there's not much we can say about precipitation because it's really, really much harder to predict precipitation than it is temperature. Growing season precipitation, now I'm using May to August, and we see a decline in that, in that period. And so that's a significant relationship. So precipitation, when we go fairly local here or to the Bitterroot Valley, it's getting drier in that growing season period. That will affect agriculture in a pretty direct way, if not forests, and certainly fire. Winter precipitation, no real trend in that over that period 1980 to 2020. Fall precipitation, hello? Oh, okay. Fall precipitation, September to November. Again, no real relationship that's significant. You can see we get some wet years and some dry years, and those are pretty evenly distributed across that period when relative to that mean. Spring precipitation, same sort of thing. No real relationship there for the Bitterroot. That's sort of good news in a way, but that things haven't changed a lot with regard to precipitation. I think a valley like this, a narrow valley like this, is so influenced by adjacent mountains that you're going to have the kinds of things that really drive your precipitation levels anyway are going to remain somewhat constant. Now there's another nuance to that, and I'll get to that here in a minute. June through July and August precipitation looks like it might be declining a bit for the projections. So that's a concern, especially when you have significant increase in the heat, because with heat you get more evapotranspiration. In other words, the water that comes off of plants as it gets hotter is going to increase, but if your precipitation is dropping, that means those plants can't survive your summers. So we might have to make some changes. That winter wheat, that shift to winter wheat is already being seen, and probably one of the things that, in terms of small grains, is going to have to be a way that we go. Using crops that we plant in the fall and harvest earlier in the summer will be an important shift to start to see. This is talking about drought, and it's kind of an interesting thing because drought is not an easy metric to capture. I used what's called the Standardized Precipitation Index, and this is basically just a precipitation to begin with. I have an explanation up there. I won't go into the details of it. But the idea is, what it looks at is over 5-year period, or 5-year periods, 1-year period, or 1-month period. So what you want to basically look at is the extremely dry is the red going all the way to the blue, which is extremely wet. And when I say extremely, when they're that dark colors. The lighter colors are sort of near the mean. And so you can look for the years. This starts in 1980 and goes to 2022 again. And you know, when you had wet periods versus dry periods, again, interestingly, the state as a whole, and Hamilton follows the state as a whole pretty much with this particular index, other than the very far north part of the state, or north central part of the state, it follows this idea that things are actually getting wetter in general. And that warmer air holds more water. It's as simple as that. And if you look at it over the increased time period, you should see increased amount of precipitation. So let's see, what was I trying to show with can't remember. Oh, maybe it was, oh yeah, this starts in 2000 and goes to 2022, and this started back in 1980. So by using different segments of years, you can actually start to see when you are drier than normal or wetter than normal in different patterns. Anyway, that's kind of, you have to kind of stare at these for a while. And a lot of the reason I'm just bringing them out here is just so you'll go look at them and stare at them yourself a bit. So the Bitterroot drought history, standardized precipitation evaporation. Again, this is 1980 to 2022. And this is a different standardized precipitation evapotranspiration index. So it's including both of those variables, the one that loses moisture through evapotranspiration and the one that gives us water back into the system, and that's precipitation. And then it bases a drought estimate on those, given these different time segments to look at that. And you start to see that with this particular one, we start to see more drought periods, and definitely more recently, in more recent years. So, just to give you a sense for, so what's the spatial variability? From the stations near, up around Connor, all the way to Florence, you can start to see that there might be different patterns even within the valley. And as you might expect, Connor tends to be a little wetter than other parts of the valley. So this is a more standard index that's used and has been for a long, long time, the Palmer index. We call it the Palmer Z index now because there's been some modifications on it. But again, it doesn't pick up drought nearly as well as some of the newer measurements. So we're learning about the relationship between what satellites see on the ground and what that means for drought. And so what we're able to do now is associate those fairly frequent pictures that we get from satellites and relate that back to drought and have a better sense for what's going on. And the Montana drought, what's it called? The drought, I'm forgetting. Anyway, it's a group that is predicting drought on every couple of weeks in the summer. And so they kind of keep a map of Montana, and that's a pretty good, pretty useful tool. So one other thing that this software gives you is it says, okay, using different indicators of drought, it can tell you what the situation is. And this is, if you look over that period from 1980 to 2022, this is kind of the outcomes that we're seeing with the different metrics used to measure drought. And the one that should be concerning you most perhaps is stream flow. Stream flow is a big deal, and there's a lot of this valley's economy that depends on that stream flow, not to mention the irrigation that goes on. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about some things lessons, I guess, learned or predictions that I've been making. I'll keep it to myself because it's not, I'm part of the College of Agriculture and it's not our official stance. So I'll have to make it clear that it's my opinion in that case, but since I'm retiring, I can tell it to you guys. Anyway, that stream flow is a big deal. And one of the things that I think about in the Bitterroot in particular is my father always used the Y on Downing Mountain. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say the Y? I see some, yeah. Now the fire happened, it's kind of harder to see the Y. But whenever the snow got to the Y, that is when, that's high water in the river. So I always thought that was kind of interesting because the snow melt's only halfway up the mountain. Now, I suspect that happens maybe about the same time, but it goes right on by the Y. In other words, the snow that actually lasts and serves our groundwater, serves our summer flow, is coming from a much higher elevation. So the November and December snow that falls will, if it stays there over the entire winter, it basically turns to ice and is much more slow melting. This is kind of where they screwed up in the Flathead, because all of our monitoring of snow water equivalent tends to be above 7,000 feet. So we miss that critical loss of snow that's at those lower elevations. We might get a whole bunch of snow in March and even April, but that snow goes away really fast in a couple of days. And it used to go away much slower from a lower elevation, and those stations would pick that up. They don't anymore because the snow melt goes right by them. So that's an issue. We need more monitoring of exactly what's going on with the snow. But for the time being, just watch how fast it goes by the Y. Because that's probably going to tell you what kind of situation you're going to be for stream flows, etc. Because what's happening is those higher elevations. I mean, you can look right now. Ward Mountain has some snow on the top, but Downing Mountain doesn't. It's that high elevation snow that really counts and turns to ice and is slow melting. So those are things that are critical. The Bitterroot has some really great protection because you've got these little reservoirs that were built back in the wilderness, and so most of the streams actually have continuous flow. But you can't take all the water out of them before they get to the river. Okay, so irrigation is something to really have a hard look at, I think, and start to say, what is the irrigation for? Certainly in other valleys that we've looked at land use change in, for example, the Paradise Valley, we see a big proportion of the newer center pivots being put on land that is not really used for agriculture. They might take a hay, take one hay cutting off of it, but otherwise it's simply to be green because people will buy land that's green for a lot more money. So those are kinds of issues that are important to start to consider. This was the real-time conditions, current forecast, and future projections of climate information across the United States to assist with decision-related agriculture, climate, fire conditions, etc. So this is a fire condition measurement that gives you the increase in the number of days where you will have, high probability of fire, basically. So there'll be with that high fire danger situation. And so this is out to that period of, this is actually, when I did this, this was out to 2039, so, which is usually the first half of the century. The total number of days which are classified as high fire danger calculated as the days with 100-hour fuel moisture that is below the 20th percentile from the historic years. Fire danger percentiles are used for many applications, so including the Smokey Bear signs, etc. So this is something to be aware of. Fire is, just part of life here. And unfortunately, it means that we live in smoke for a big chunk of the year, and probably got lucky in some of these years, like this last year where we didn't get much, or I know we didn't in Bozeman, but you probably had more than we did. So that's, that fire effects are pretty significant when in fact we're above healthy levels of smoke. Not to mention the fact that we're just burning down the forest. 100-hour fuel moisture simulated out into the end of the century, or 70. This is based on the 71 to 2000 average. So we see 11.5%, and 2010 to 2039 was average of 11.1% fuel moisture. So we saw that increase. So it's happening, and it's obvious because you see the fires. Okay, smoke and other health risks, air pollutants. Actually, I found this interesting because it was these are all point sources other than smoke from fires. So the Bitterroot has actually increased and has some of the densest, you can even see with other surrounding valleys, some of the densest producers of other kinds of air pollution other than smoke. So when you add the two together, you're going to have a more serious situation, and especially with the potential for having inversions here because of the closeness of the mountains. So that's, that I found interesting. Wind. I would have bet that the wind had increased, but it hasn't. In fact, and it's projected to actually continue to decrease, which is a bit of a surprise to me. And this is from 1950 out to then projecting out beyond well, at 2010 is when they started using the projections that are on this. But anyway, that's the January, December, that full year of annual wind speed. You can divide it into portions of the year as well. But anyway, that was one that was kind of surprising. I actually did try all the other months, and they were all the same. They're showing actual decline, if anything, in wind speeds. A bit surprising to me. I'm anxious to look at other parts of the state on that. And guess what the windiest city is, or town in Montana is? Livingston, yes. What's the second? Cutbank, then Havre. But they just have a new weather station at Browning that's almost guaranteed to be the worst. So, having spent some time in the recent years up there, I can tell you it's rare to not have a windy day up there. Okay, so I'm going to stop with that, but I want to conclude with a couple of ideas that I have about resilience and about some of the important things that I think are a message that really are statewide. And the first one is management of water and how important it is to manage water in a serious way with data and measurements of your water system. And knowing who's using water and who isn't. And this will have to be a revisit of some of the water rights legislation, which will be a hell of a fight. You know, Montana has always, it's always been an adage in Montana that water's for fighting and whiskey's for drinking. So I think that's really true, but I think it's a serious thing to consider. So you have a huge irrigation system here, and a lot of your water goes into it. And that's important, and in fact, it's probably even created wetlands that were not originally wetlands, because as those ditches, one of the first things that people try to do is increase the efficiency of those ditches so you don't lose water. So they'll line them and things like that. Bad idea. Turns out that the leakier those ditches are, the better, because what it does is keep your aquifer full and your wells won't go dry. This happened in the Beaverhead. They lined the ditches, and all of a sudden everybody's water was dropping out. They had to re-drill their wells. They had to go deeper, and anybody who's drilled a well recently knows how much that costs. That was a huge issue. So they found themselves actually creating leaks in the ditch. change so they could go back. And sure enough, the water levels came back up. So that's something that's important, watching the water levels. And we do have a good data set. I didn't get a chance to get it in this talk, but that does show where wells are, how wells distribution has changed, and what the water level is in those wells. And there's some that are specifically monitored all the time. So that's useful information. The other thing is this understanding what that snowmelt is doing. Really crucial, I think, and I think we really have to change some of our thinking about how we manage that. And when we release water into our irrigation system, and more importantly, probably when we stop, and what agricultural operations are going to be affected. A lot of agriculturists in the state are turning toward damming every little gully that they have on their place to capture spring flow and have water that gets into the summer at least part of the way for their livestock. Then their livestock don't have to travel as far, and it makes total sense to maintain production that way. However, it totally disrupts the hydrology of the whole system. And if the water doesn't go down to the rivers and creeks, then the people down below don't get it. And so that's another important issue, to start to maybe map those things, understand those things, and talk with agriculturists about that. How many are farmers or ranchers here? Okay, good. All right, so, and pipe up if you think that I'm exaggerating a problem, but I think that's something we definitely see as a statewide issue. So another thing, and this is really not popular, is the idea that the Midwest is where we are producing mostly corn and soybeans, and most of that corn and soybeans, well, about 90% of it is fed to animals or goes into ethanol production. That will change. That has to change. And when that changes, what effect is that going to have on Montana? Well, for one thing, if we're not feeding cows in feedlots, which there's a lot of good reasons to not do that. Number one is we are asking for the next spillover event in those high-density animal operations, whether it's chickens or pigs or cows. We're going to see pandemics show up all the time. That's predicted, and I think it's an accurate prediction, because those are the situations where you're going to see more and more of those. So that's not a good thing. We've got to move away from that. So preparing a cow that will get sent to a feedlot is something we should consider in Montana is not an appropriate approach. We've got to figure out how to market our animals more locally, finish them here, and when I say finish them here, finishing them on grass, admitting to a lower weight animal, but you can make up some difference because of the transportation costs. We can do more local processing. We have to think about that. Now, the good news is that if you take a lot of meat production out of the Midwest, which is primarily where most of the feedlots are, where are those animals going to end up? People are not going to stop eating meat. All the data shows that meat is being eaten more and more and more, especially in the third world. It's just a sign of people becoming more wealthy. So it's really increased in places like China. We're going to be the place to produce meat. That's the good news. But we got to learn how to do it and not destroy our system. So I think that is an important, if you have a long-term view of your ranch, then I say think about how do you grow these animals in a way that can be sustainable when we're looking forward to that reality. That is my opinion. That is not something from the MSU College of Agriculture. Oh, I don't care, I guess, but anyway, one of the things that I've worked on a lot recently has been return of bison on the reservations. And that animal is far more well equipped to deal with what we're projecting for climate into the future. Not easy to manage right now, but we're learning how to do that. And the fact is, most of those things can be overcome, and especially with modern technologies. So we've got to think about that. As I said before, if you're growing small grains, moving to winter planted crops is really important. And planting in September when it's still dry, we're getting far more precipitation in the fall, more precipitation in the spring. That's all good news for those kind of crops that are planted in the fall and can now survive the winter because we're getting those increasing temperatures. What else was I going to say? Well, the water and the animal thing are the two important ones, and I might remember them throughout the day. But anyway, thank you very much for coming. I hope I didn't bore you too much with a bunch of data slides, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
So bison, we're talking about bisons. How about on the valley bottom here, the Bitterroot, irrigated ground? The advantages there versus more central Montana? Disadvantages?
Yeah, the question is, what about moving to bison in a place like the Bitterroot where you have a lot of irrigated land? Well, first of all, they don't need the irrigation nearly as much. They'll travel much farther to water. They are much more water efficient animal, but they tend to need big space. And that's kind of at a premium in this valley, I would say. So that's going to be kind of an issue. But it's even an issue in central Montana where there's big spaces. But what we're finding is people that group together, and with the modern technologies for identifying animal by animal with chips and tags, ear tags and things, we can pretty much know what animal's what or who belongs to what and let them free and take down the fences using virtual fencing and things like that. So there might be options for that. The east side where it's drier, that's probably the place to be doing that. You know, I think a lot of this is following the value. You know, the nutritional value of that meat is much higher, but mostly because it's not finished, typically. Now, if you're Ted Turner, you finish it just like a cow and make it into cow meat. But that's not the direction to go. So, and actually, Turner operation is moving now off of corn finishing to a shorter finishing period and using barley. So they're at least using a local crop now to do that. But nonetheless, those are the kinds of things that need to be done. And there's not a lot of effort. It needs to come from grassroots organizations like this to say, we need to figure out how to do this. And we need to help those people do it that want to have a long-term view of doing animal agriculture in any region of the state. Yeah, good question. Yes?
Do you have an opinion about methods of irrigation? What's more efficient, what's less efficient?
Methods of irrigation, do I have an opinion? You've seen changes in that technology which are all focused on efficiency. So from just the sprinkler, the old-fashioned sprinkler or the flood irrigation to sprinklers to now facing the water down and dribbling it more onto the landscape and moving it. Those are all been efficiency increasing factors, so which are good. Now it turns out that there are cases where the hydrology of an area can actually be better, i.e. the water gets distributed in a more effective way for all the multiple objectives in agriculture, which now are not just agricultural production, but are clean water, are maintaining fisheries in the streams, you know, all these different factors which are all kind of competing for that that water. But in those cases, there are cases where flood irrigation was actually better. And a lot of it was maintaining wetlands for a lot of different species. So biological conservation, when it's included as one of the objectives, which some places do, then you have to have a close look at what is your hydrologic situation. In other words, what part of the greater hydrology unit are you, and where does your water come from and where does it go? So I tell students on and on that the ecology of your system, whether it's for production or for conservation, is site-specific, time-specific, and history-specific. All those things influence how you might want to manage a system. So figuring out how to monitor your own system is really important. And that's why one of the reasons I bring this toolkit to you, because you really do have the ability to get some site-specific information. A lot of the climate information in here comes from a gridded surface that covers the entire Earth. So in a 2 mile by 2 mile square area. So you can say, I'm going to put my point right in the middle of my land and see what it says about that system. And you can only imagine, wow, how can they be accurate with that? Well, they're accurate enough if you take a long enough period to where they will actually expose the kinds of trends that might be important. Sorry, I went beyond the answering your question, but that's basically what's happened. And it's also me avoiding the fact that there probably are different kinds of nozzles that do better than others, and I don't know what they are. Sorry. But Zach might. So talk to Zach.
Bruce?
Yeah.
We have just about time for one more question.
Oh, okay.
And I'd like to ask it.
Okay.
You know, we're seeing 500-year events, 1,000-year events just about every week. Or things that were predicted but are happening a lot sooner in terms of heat, flash floods, flash droughts. A community like ours, you know, when we've just had the hottest September ever by a long stretch worldwide, you know, what's your advice to average folks and to local agencies, local government, in terms of preparing for the kind of thing that happened in the Paradise Valley, for instance?
Well, a lot of that, I think, is to somehow for the county in their planning effort to identify crucial areas. And I think that are crucial for whatever objective, whether it's agricultural production or conservation, which I'm kind of pitting against each other as ends of the spectrum, but and it may be more triangular than that. But nonetheless, what I have found is that we need more effort in understanding our system through monitoring and deciding where things can happen and where they shouldn't happen. And, I mean, you can't just tell somebody what to do with their land, but you can certainly lean on them in a way that I think identifies them with awards for doing the right thing and stuff like that. I think that's really crucial. Create some carrots for doing the right thing or doing the things that comply with what your resilience effort is all about.